with at least 773 million young people and adults worldwide lacking basic literacy skills as we speak. The COVID-19 pandemic has hit hard on education and training systems, with the long closures affecting more than 1.6 billion learners at its peak in the second and third waves of the pandemic. This is also an opportunity, the message goes on, to call attention to the progress that has been made. For example, in 2018, Statistics South Africa estimated that literacy rates of people aged 15 and over is 88%, an increase of 6% from 2009's figures. Indicators for literacy rate was the completion of a grade 7 education. Males had a slightly higher literacy than females, while urban dwellers were more literate than their rural counterparts. The message continues, South Africa's progress and innovative programs are recognized worldwide, with references to South Africa's Hari Guide, adult literacy program, which offers classes in all 11 official languages, along with sign language and Braille. As well as the intergenerational family literacy programs that many South African organizations have embarked upon. South Africa has also demonstrated the critical role of literacy campaigns like the Read to Lead campaign, spearheaded by the Department of Basic Education, which mobilizes partners to improve the reading abilities of all South African children. The success in mobilizing could be seen with the private sector and civil society organizations working hand in hand with government to form the National Reading Coalition in 2019. There are very few presidents who talk about literacy and the need for a reading culture. And so South Africa, the message continues, is privileged to have a powerful reading advocate as President Cyril Ramaphosa himself leads national reading sessions. The COVID-19 pandemic and its repercussions have definitely impacted on the progress the country has made, and I'm certain the Minister will address this matter. The crisis has amplified the centrality of literacy to people's lifelong learning. Reading and writing skills are essential to access life-saving information. And in our growing technological and information-rich environment, digital skills are considered to be part of basic literacy skills, as the ability to use devices, communication applications, and so on is becoming a prerequisite for full and active participation in learning and work. A critical component in any literacy program is effective educator training. Finally, the letter continues, this forum is a celebratory forum for UNESCO to congratulate South Africa for winning the UNESCO King Sejong Literacy Prize. And I'm certain the Minister will speak to this as well. 3 outstanding organizations have been chosen to receive this prestigious literacy award, sponsored by the government of the Republic of Korea, that honors work on mother language-based literacy development. Limitless Horizons Full, or LHI from Guatemala, is recognized for promoting interactive literacy programming in rural areas by broadcasting bilingual stories. The National Institute of Open Schooling of India was chosen for their work on enabling the education of people with disabilities through technology-enabled inclusive learning materials with specific focus on Indian Sign Language-based content. And, as the Minister will share with us later, from South Africa, Puku Children's Literature Foundation is honored for its work as well today. The regional office says that it proudly stands with Puku and South Africa as you receive the prize today on Global International Literacy Day. Chairperson, it is now my pleasure and distinct honor to introduce our keynote speaker, Minister Angie Motshekga. Let me begin by acknowledging that I have known and journeyed with Minister Motshekga, or shall I say Comrade Motshekga, for some time now in our shared quest for advancing people's education for people's power, a journey we commenced together in the mid-1980s as we challenged apartheid and Bantu education right at its core. In this quest for freedom, democracy, human dignity, and equality for all, we're investing every inch of our beings, often leading to long spells of detention without trial and of isolation in prison cells, to make apartheid unworkable and the country ungovernable, while putting in place the pillars of a post-apartheid education and democratic order. Key elements of that task were the installation of democratically elected parent-teachers associations, parent-teacher-student associations, and broad transformation forums in our schools, colleges, and universities in order to wrest governance away from the apartheid dictatorship. The nurturing of a new people's education curriculum through our various people's education commissions was a second task. And a third primary task was the establishment of a democratic and vanguard teachers' union to advance the course of teachers and of people's education. Ms. Motshekga is Executive Committee member of the Radical National Education Union of South Africa, or NUSA as it was known, and of the National Education Crisis Committee, was centrally involved in the conceptualization, planning, and execution of this work. And therefore, it is no surprise that today she is Minister, our Minister of Basic Education. A former lecturer at the University of the Witwatersrand and the erstwhile Soweto College of Education, Minister Motshekga began her professional life as a teacher at Orlando High School. She is the daughter of Patricia Ramorola, a retired teacher with more than 40 years' experience in pedagogy. She holds a master's degree from the University of the Witwatersrand. Ms. Motshekga was a student at the famed Sekano Ntowane Secondary School in Senawane, Soweto, when Tom Mantata of the Soweto Committee of 10 fame was on the teaching staff. Among her products, Minister Motshekga counts the Anglican Church Archbishop Thabo Makgoba. Following her election to President of the ANC Women's League in 2008, she observed, "I hope I'll bring humility and absolute commitment to the plight of women who are marginalized, and hope that we'll hold hands to attend to the issues that plague us: poverty, unemployment, health, and violence against women." Minister Motshekga is a devout Catholic, is married to former Gauteng Premier Matola Motshekga, an avid reader who has left her no choice but to love books too. Not that she needed that, of course. And prior to assuming the role of Minister of Basic Education in 2009, Minister Motshekga was the member of the Gauteng Provincial Executive Committee for Education. She's a member of the African National Congress's National Executive Committee, and she has also been assigned by Cabinet as President of the South Africa National Commission for UNESCO. Thank you, Minister, and welcome to our virtual podium. Thank you very much.
No, thank you very much, Chair. Let me also thank the chairperson of the program, Ms. Palisa Chobeka, also the Director General of UNESCO. Also acknowledge yourself, Comrade Iron, Professor and Chairperson of our South African National Commission for UNESCO. And also like to acknowledge the presence of Ms. Caroline Medel Anonievo from the UNESCO Regional Office of Southern Africa, which is based in Zimbabwe. And Chair, let me really say it is indeed for me a great honor that I address this 2021 UNESCO International Literacy Day. Thank you very much for inviting me and giving me that opportunity. As Prof has said, the 2021 theme talks about the literacy for a human-centered recovery, narrowing the digital divide. It is an important discussion in the context of the rampant COVID-19 pandemic that has forced many across the globe to accelerate the adoption of digital technologies to advance the right to literacy. Indeed, literacy is a human right and the basis for lifelong learning. We all know and agree that it does empower individuals, families, communities to improve their livelihoods and their lives. We know that it's a multiplier effect. It helps in many instances to eradicate poverty, reduce child mortality, and curb population growth. It also contributes to achieving gender equality and ensures sustainable development, peace, and democracy. So in today's rapid changing and knowledge-based societies, the acquisition of basic literacy skills and the advancement and application of such skills throughout life is extremely critical. We are also acutely aware that our learners haven't fared well despite notable improvements in the recent rounds of international testing systems as a country. Chair, as a country, we find ourselves, I think you also noted our recently appointed president of BUSA was screaming loud, we're the last, we're the worst in reading and other things, and which is not very true. But the fact is, our reading levels are not where we would have wanted them to be as a country, without really exaggerating to say we're the worst in the world. Be it as it may be, the Southern and Eastern Consortium for Monitoring Education, SACMEC, for the International Reading and Literacy Studies, has really also indicated that we are on an upward trend as a country in our reading proficiency. But we also say it's not yet a period for us to celebrate. We are still awaiting the team's results. But we have committed ourselves as a country to improve the average results of SACMEC 6, and that we want really to move from where we were currently at 495 to the 600 points by 2022. We do intend to improve the average grade 8 scores in teams. Our target is that we want to move from 264, where we were initially, to about 40 points by 2023. By 2030, Chair, we hope to reach the desirable 500 center points in teams for the grade 8 scores. So as a result of these lofty goals, we have added some impetus to the literacy endeavors since May 2019 general polls. We remain convinced that literacy, that reading and writing and numeracy are heartbeats for our basic education system. As the Prophet already indicated, His Excellency, the President of South Africa, has given us the basic education sector a mandate to ensure that every learner can read with comprehension across all subjects by the 10th birthday. And that's what we have been instructed to do. Despite COVID, that's what we are targeting for. So we have since coined 11 priorities to take the basic education sector to the next level. Invariably, we have decided that improving the foundational skills of literacy and numeracy, especially the reading for meaning, is now an apex priority in our sector. So in 2019, we launched the National Reading Coalition to support reading improvements across the country. The NRC remains the task of establishing reading clubs, training teachers and material developments in reading, numeracy, and literacy. We have also mobilized resources and expertise to enhance quality teaching and learning in reading, in numeracy, in the literacy space. The National Reading Campaign has developed and advanced a national reading plan that aligns and coordinates various initiatives that support existing initiatives, including the Read to Lead campaign. Subsequently, we have launched a comprehensive cradle to grave integrated national reading sector plan. The spanking new integrated national reading sector plan does align our policy lodestar to the National Development Plan that seeks to achieve critical developments for the country by 2030. That National Development Plan of the country envisions that by 2030, schools will provide all learners with quality education, especially in literacy, mathematics, and science. The National Reading Sector Plan is an overarching evidence-based strategy that will alter the country's entire reading and literacy landscape. It complements rather than replace all existing literacy initiatives, including the Read to Lead campaign. And the main thrust of our comprehensive national reading sector plan is to ensure reading for meaning across the curriculum in all grades, in all schools throughout the country. Chair, our plan is to ensure that we reach all the learners to read well and to read for meaning. By 2024, we hope that the plan would have been successfully implemented throughout the system, meaning wall-to-wall coverage, circuit by circuit, district by district, school by school, class by class. Which means that all teachers would have been trained on the latest reading pedagogics. The National Reading Sector Plan will be supported by teachers and subject advisors trained on reading methodologies. All our learners will have been provided with a minimum reading pack for improving their literacy levels. We'd like to mobilize civil society across the nuke and crane of our country to be part of this reading revolution. We want all parents of school-going age to form a backbone of this national reading sector plan. As government, we have resolved that we need to socialize all our learners into becoming lifelong readers. We must support them in their reading for academic purpose and for knowledge and for enjoyment. We have emphasized in our public messaging that the importance of literacy is not a portion of education, it is education itself. So since 2017, we have implemented a primary school reading improvement plan in this regard, and the program aims to improve literacy and reading outcomes in grades 1 to 6, with a key focus on teacher development and support. This program aims to strengthen the capacity of the foundation and intermediate phase teachers to teach learners how to read more effectively. It achieves this by improving the skills of the subject advisors to provide adequate support to teachers and upskilling school management teams. We have launched a much vaunted early grade reading assessment to ensure evidence-based tracking and improvements. So the objective of this education reading assessment plan is to track the reading proficiency level of learners at regular intervals with a sample of learners in all 11 official languages. We focus on language offered as the language of learning and teaching, LOLT, and English first additional language to inform interventions in the teaching and learning of reading. We have also launched the early grade reading study, developed objectives for this early reading grade study to inform national scale-up of evidence-based programs that positively impacts reading and literacy outcomes in early grades. So EGRA, the early grade reading strategy, it aims to build evidence about what works to improve the learning and teaching of early grade reading in South African schools. It is a research project that has investigated the impact of alternative forms of support. It is focused on implementing the home language literacy and first additional language curriculum. Interventions have been taken in Northwest and Mpumalanga provinces. We have begun to provide teacher toolkits with lesson plans, workbooks, big books, graded readers, most importantly, interactive digital content and trackers. We're also providing teachers with tablets loaded with digital curriculum resources to aid in teaching in the 21st century. So I am proud, Chair, to announce that South Africa has designated the first of its kind online program dubbed the Comprehensive Across the Curriculum that offers an opportunity for teachers to be upskilled in reading comprehension. This program will be launched later this month, and it will train teachers to teach reading comprehension skills across the curriculum. In line with the UNESCO advice, South Africa intends to relaunch the much improved early development program. The plan of ECD's function shift is there, so I can see Chairperson Jobeka really wants a time. Let me just move quickly then to really say, in conclusion, in response to the stubborn reading challenges, we have partnered with UNICEF, and we are very grateful for that, with the European Union, with funded programs, but are also working with a number of agencies in the country to ensure that we are assisted. As I close, Chair, I wish to take this opportunity to congratulate one of our own, Ms. Elina Sisulu, from Puku Children's Literature Foundation for winning the UNESCO King International Literacy Prize. And thank you very much for joining this webinar to share the work of your foundation. And I really want again to take this opportunity to thank you very much, my sister, and wish to invite you to address us on the work that this foundation is doing. And again, say we're very proud, we're very excited about the honor that you received. Your honor is ours, and say congratulations and thank you very much. So, Chair, thank you very much, and let me invite Ms. Elina Sisulu to come and address us on the work of the foundation. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. It is really, I think, as Professor Rensburg said, it's a time of where we really have to have utmost presence of mind in the way we go forward in the literacy journey. And it was fascinating listening to your presentation. There were so many lights that were going on in our minds. So I'm really honored to be here today. And I really thank the National Commission of UNESCO for their support in nominating us for this award, first and foremost. And also, Honorable Minister, Professor Rensburg, Program Director, May Chobeka, thank you very much for according us the opportunity to talk about Puku today. I will not say much because fortunately I have one of our senior education specialists with me today, Nomvuyo Mzamane, who I'm sure some people in your department have worked with, who, as far as early childhood is concerned, early childhood education for the African child, she's very well versed and has been a tremendous resource to Puku. So I also want to acknowledge our partners, because I always say that Puku is a baking powder project. We are a small little organization, and we see the ingredients of the cake, and we realize that as the baking powder, we just provide that extra ingredient that enables the cake to rise. And so our partners, UNISA, especially UNISA Department of Library Sciences and the Department of African Languages, the National Library of South Africa, PANSELB, ILIFA, which is a language advocacy organization, EB, International Board for Books for Young People, and Biblionev, and many other literacy and education organizations that we've worked with. So this prize is not only ours alone, it's for all of them, and represents the collective work that we have done. So first of all, I understand we'll start with the video, which outlines Puku's work, and then go on to, then I will come in and just explain one aspect of the work that we focus specifically on, the discussion of the webinars that we carried out in 9 languages. I also want to acknowledge the Presidential Employment Stimulus Program. Our work in 2021 would have not been possible. And I think that the work that we were able to do, which earned us this award, really comes directly out of the PSP program. And I need to mention that that program focused on creating employment opportunities, actually paying people for the work they did. And so we were able as Puku to pay content producers. And I think that's what enables us to produce the kind of work which received an international award. So thank you to the Presidential Employment Stimulus Program and the Presidency and the National Arts Council. Thank you. So we ready, I think, for the video now.
Ngifisa ukuthi izwi lomxoxa lingabhubhi nanini eAfrika, ukuthi zonke izingane emhlabeni jikelele zizwe ulozolo lwezincwadi futhi zilokwane zikwazi ukunothisa umhlaba ezikuzimangaliso nemihlabahloso yezindaba nezinganekwane. Puku shares this vision, which was so eloquently articulated by President Nelson Mandela. We strive for a reading culture rooted in our indigenous storytelling traditions in all our languages. Since its inception in 2010, Puku has worked to develop a structured and organized system for selecting, reviewing, and accurate data on children's books through its digital platforms. Puku has also been a strategic convener for collaborative projects to promote children's literature in South Africa's indigenous language. From 2013 to 2018, the Puku Story Festival in isiXhosa had a major impact on the Eastern Cape community, as did the Africa Kids Festival in Johannesburg in 2016. Puku held a series of workshops on writing stories and reviewing children's books. These were aimed at parents, educators, writers, storytellers, and artists. Esau narrated her story, Koi Nga Koi, which is ostrich and tortoise in English, at a Puku workshop in 2018. Koi Koi has been translated into Nama, isiZulu, isiXhosa, and Setswana. The publication of this, the first ever book in the Ngu language, a template for publication in other endangered languages. Puku has received national and international accolades for its work and is recognized as a thought leader in literature space. The COVID-19 pandemic stopped us from having physical gatherings. It forced us to use digital platforms. Puku leveraged the increased uptake in virtual communication by organizing webinars in indigenous. The webinar series, organized in partnership with Pensalb, ILIFA, and UNISA, connected institutions and organizations, leading experts in the indigenous language ecosystem with voice ground. This is a good example of how digital platforms can be used to promote multi-sectoral conversations within and between language communities. The webinars were held in 9 South African languages. Online book reviewing course is a comprehensive curriculum targeting individuals new to book reviewing. It is available on YouTube and other Puku online platforms. Just as Tata Nelson Mandela wanted children in the world to experience the wonder of books, so do we want all children to have access to the digital spaces where they can enlarge their earthly dwelling place with the magic of stories. Adequate investment and creative partnerships, the sky is the limit.
Thank you. So that was just a quick outline of the work that it was a quick outline of Puku's history. And on the next slide, we just summarizes our presentation, which is using digital technologies to promote children's literature in South Africa's indigenous languages. Our digital platforms are on this slide. We are, especially our YouTube, where we have recently posted our first ever course on reviewing books, online course on reviewing books in indigenous languages. So I'll just go very quickly what we did digitally in 2021. So we have produced and we are in the process of finalizing iCatalog Year 2, which is a list of 100 recommended books in isiXhosa for early childhood and foundation phase. And this is a pilot which we will repeat in other languages. And the purpose of this is to make it easier for parents, teachers to select books. I've mentioned the book review tutorial, which is a 10-lesson book review course, and that's available on our YouTube. This is a work in progress. It's a template, and so we welcome feedback. At this stage, really, feedback is like gold, both negative and positive. We need it all. Multimedia, we've had community engagements on radio and social media. And the value of this, it brings in a multi-generational conversation on literacy, because we believe strongly as Puku, we target the parents, the teachers, the librarians, the storytellers, because we believe that for those interacting with children, if they're not infected with enthusiasm for literacy, they won't infect the children. As Sindiwe Magona says, you can't infect people with an illness you don't have. So similarly, you can't make children enthusiastic about reading if you yourself don't have that enthusiasm. Then this presentation will focus on the webinars we did, which were curated conversations amongst writers, academics, publishers, activists, and institutions in the indigenous language ecosystem. Because we believe that we need creative coalitions around reading, and we need to bring all these major institutions together. So these were strategic conversations between leading experts with a special focus on reading from early childhood. So we had 9 webinars in 9 of South Africa's languages. And these conversations were really taking up the opportunity offered by the digital uptake. Because as we know, people who never would have thought of being on Zoom or Teams or whatever other digital platform now are forced to do so. So we took the opportunity to have these conversations, which if we had done it physically would have cost us much, much more. So I think I'll move on and hand over to my colleague at this stage to to talk about the webinars themselves and the main themes. And given that these were in 9 languages, and you will see on the side of the screen, due to time constraints, we won't go into detail, but on the side you can see who was participating in the webinars, the dates, and the languages. The conversations were very deep and far-reaching. And what we've done in this presentation is just to synthesize, to pull out the main points, and pick out the few that are specifically relevant to the topic today. And so I'm going to hand over to Nomvuyo, who will take us quickly through the slides.
Good morning, Minister, Chairperson, Program Director, and fellow panelists. My task is to summarize the summaries, if you will, of the webinars. It is a synthesis of just under 100 panelists over a 2-month period. So there will be points that are very important that they mentioned that in the interest of time, we simply can't get into. The most prevailing sentiment across the board was the need for indigenous languages to penetrate digital spaces in multiple ways, and ranging from low technology right up to 21st century technologies, primarily in response to the realities of what's on the ground. We are very much aware of what's ideal, but we're also aware of network difficulties and connectivity challenges in our most deprived communities. In our next slide, we look at another issue that was important to say. As much as we are wanting to focus on the future, on digital technologies, they become simply a tool, and we must still remember that at the core, the foundation, the center of everything we do is to continue to invest in family and community literary traditions, which many of the panelists decried as things that we were losing. There are multiple ideas for how communities can promote literacy. Some of our fellow laureates at UNESCO are doing incredible work in their respective countries, and some of those are things that we might want to emulate, and we know they certainly would like to do some of the things that we do. But family remains central. Storytelling is lost. We want to be able to return to that and to do it in such a way that is either enabled by technology or becomes a content feeder for our technologies. We also want to meet the demands of today's youth. We spoke quite in depth about this at all the webinars, recognizing that there are so many more genres of children's literature, and that there are so many more complex societal issues that children of today are facing. The need for indigenous languages to maintain that cultural ethos, that moral compass, is still in existence. The Afrocentric themes must still be there. However, we would like them to reflect difficult challenges that our children today are exposed to or themselves face. There is no need in this presentation to go into details of things like GBV, gender-based violence, for example. But our children are aware that it exists, and so there's a healing and an explanatory role that storytelling can play. Today's literature that is quite popular amongst many of our children are themes like cosmology, like magic. Children would like these, but they'd like to be able to read them in their home languages. And of course, would like to be able to infuse many of our traditional stories with STEM-related topics, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, to rewrite and retell some of our traditional stories. The importance of indigenous languages being a communication tool and a cultural compass was emphasized again and again and again by all the panelists. We also want to be able to make children's literature in our languages a very serious intellectual field of inquiry. For those who are practitioners, there's a yearning to consume research that guides them. And we are aware, having worked with various universities around the country, that they themselves have a keen interest in what practitioners are dealing with and what they need. And so we look to institutions of higher education to cooperate with us, to work with us in order to be able to advance that. But in the webinars, for many of us who are not currently working at universities, we were a bit surprised to learn that there is a dearth of collaboration sometimes between the various African language departments at universities. And the webinar presenters called for that as an efficient and effective way for us to be able to reach the promised land, if you will. We also spoke about how important it is to repatriate literature. The definition of repatriation here for us is to produce a children's literature in the original language of the person who wrote it. We are inspired by what Sol Plaatje University in the Northern Cape is doing in this regard with some of Date Sol Plaatje's works, where although Date Sol Plaatje wrote in English, they are translating his works back into Setswana. And we'd love to see that for the children's literature universe. Many of our children's literature in South Africa is currently written in English, even if it's written by someone who speaks an indigenous language. And so that's the kind of work we'd love to see in repatriation. But there's also a need for intertranslation. And here we simply mean that just because something was written in Mu doesn't mean it should then be translated into English. It can go straight from the Ngu into isiZulu, isiXhosa, Sesotho, and so on and so forth. We went deeper into this issue of translation, which is quite frankly a sensitive spot for many of the presenters in a number of areas. One, that there isn't as much valuing of translators as they would like, and there needs to be increased investments in the work of translation. We acknowledged with the presenters that the children's literature translation tend to be done by individuals who are not necessarily as in tune. The quality assurance processes does not necessarily make it such that the people who are doing it are in tune with not just the language skill. It's far more important than that, because the translation for children is not technical. So we need to have translators who also know children, who also know child development, in addition to them being capable translators. And that would love to be able to have academia and qualification bodies like SACE and others to participate in this literacy ecosystem, so that we create a specialized qualification for translators of children's work. We also spoke about a need for an enabled and enabling publishing terrain. And here the minister will have to forgive us, but we must quote one of the webinar participants who said, "Getting books onto the Department of Education's set works list is akin to attempting space travel when all you have is a bucket and a dream." And the essence of this was echoed not just in terms of the Department of Education, but also in terms of publishers, commercial publishers, the entire book publishing ecosystem, that there's a tendency for them to play more a gatekeeper role than an enabling role. The gates get closed more than they get open. And so the webinar participants wanted to understand what the real investments in programs and initiatives across all government structures were. It isn't just about the Department of Basic Education, but also would like to know what NGOs are doing in the book publishing ecosystem. Because if a commercial book publisher tells us that they are not able to make a profit from an indigenous language book, an issue that isn't actually tested, by the way, but would like to have individuals whose bottom line isn't necessarily profit to be able to invest in that. Because as the minister said at the beginning, the issue here is about literacy. It's about children being able to read. She didn't say literacy in English. She didn't say being able to read in English. It is literacy, and it is reading across the board, and especially in your home language. We also talked about public celebrations, and this will be my last point. We looked around the world in envy at the public celebrations of children's literature in those countries and their individual indigenous languages, even if it is looking at the United States and how people who are nominated, books that are nominated for awards, get recognized and celebrated incredibly. We aspire to have that in South Africa, to have a brand South Africa, a South Africa-centric revolution that celebrates content creators, producers, that stimulates the multi-sectoral engagements about our books and in our languages. But it isn't just about the awards. Public celebrations are also about story festivals, which we did in plenty form prior to COVID-19, and now have to look at different ways of doing it. Literary competitions can still occur. Village readathons would have to explore different ways to doing it, and we at Puku already have some thoughts around that using enabled technology. In closing on my part, I'll just say that the biggest request from the panelists was that the engagements, the webinar engagements on children's literature must continue. We must focus on different themes and different topics, but we must also, this time, instead of speaking in individual language groups, they would like to be able to speak across languages. And I'll hand it over to Mayor Eleanor now.
Thank you very much. As you can see, it was a very rich discussion, and we will continue forward with our partners, with PenSALB, UNISA. I need to also acknowledge here another partner who helped us as well in making this possible is NASPERS, especially Puti Mahanyele, the CEO. I must acknowledge her support. And going forward, we will continue this work, and Puku's digital platforms, we will continue to use them. We'll continue with digital upskilling. I think in the next slide, I won't talk too much about it because of time, but the next slide shows the kind of support, which really is engagement. And for those wanting to do book reviews, to look at our book review course and become a book reviewer, and also just buying books through our direct links to independent bookstores, and those who want to support further can always contact us. Finally, UNESCO has declared 2022 to 2032 as the decade of indigenous languages. And we immediately need to prioritize the empowerment of indigenous language users through children's literature. And this feeds directly into the reading aspirations that the minister outlined. Because if children, and I think educators in this conversation will have experienced this, that when you see a group of children reading in English or doing a play in English, as to compare to how they do it in their own languages, you can see the difference in animation and enthusiasm. So we need to invest in our indigenous language content producers. And it's not only a question of literacy, that literacy is important. Literacy has now become a matter of human survival. And all the greatest challenges of our time, literacy is at the heart of being able to address them. So the time for a seismic shift is now. And for us as well, the issue of jobs and employment and opportunities for meaningful work can also be a valuable side effect of engaging in a serious investment in the empowerment of indigenous language content creators, and we can change the landscape of children's books in this country. Thank you very much. Siyabonga, siyathokoza, enkosi.
Ra leboha.
Thank you, Ms. Sisulu. That was a really interesting presentation, and congratulations on Puku winning this UNESCO award. I think you can see in the chat column that there are plenty of comments and congratulations and praises for this fantastic project. Ms. Sisulu and Puku were the first of a range of panel presenters that are going to discuss how the pandemic and the digital divide has created challenges in education and training, literacy, ranging right from the early childhood development to youth and adult education. Before we commence, I'd once again just like to thank the Honourable Minister Motshekga, Professor Aaron Rensburg, and Ms. Chubeka, as well as all dignitaries, presenters, and guests for participating in this webinar. We will be taking questions that have been posted on the chat, and after the other 6 presenters have presented, we will have a session where we will try to refer some of these questions to the panelists and hopefully have a bit of time to also take some live questions. The webinar is being recorded, and all questions that we don't get to will be dealt with post the webinar, and all recordings and presentations will be made available as well. So thank you very much. Keep your comments and questions coming. I'm Stephen LaRue from Project Literacy, and I'll be facilitating this presentation panel. And we are going to start off with the ECD sector and Mr. Masenya Dikotla, who is the CEO of Maltino Institute for Language and Literacy. Welcome, Mr. Dikotla.
Thank you very much, Mr. LaRue. Good morning, Honorable Minister and the Chairperson of NETCOM. Thanks for the opportunity to present here. The theme of my presentation is based on what we normally and conventionally called school readiness, but we are stretching it forward to say, let's make the schools ready. Even as we make the learners ready, schools themselves must be ready. It's a perspective on school readiness. Thank you. My presentation has got the following items. We'll talk about the content of school readiness initiative that we are working with in the 3 provinces of Limpopo, Mpumalanga, and the Free State. We'll also talk about the model of intervention, the activities, and the concept of school natural playgrounds and outdoor activities that we expose our children to. Thank you. We'll watch the video right now at the start. So we're not getting sound.
Yeah, it's on mute. Danny? Masenya, you are on mute. Can we get help?
I'm not on mute. It must be Danny, the one who's operating the video. Danny?
I can hear you now.
Yeah. I can't hear the sound, Danny. Oh no.
Danny, can you assist with the sound for the video? We might have to restart it. We can't hear it.
Playgrounds increases in a tangible way how learners learn and how they become ready for school and the school ready for them. It uses natural playgrounds which are prepared by parents and community members.
Exactly what we have built it as parents from everything we had at our home, starting with plastics, papers, old tires, timbers. So this made me closer, connected, and part of the school, part of the education of our children as we did this one.
Ba ithuta ka go raloka and bana ba rena ba developa different skills ka baka la natural playground. Bana ka mona ba kgona go raloka ka moka, ba kgona go ithuta go bolela, ba kgona go share, ba kgona go dira segwera.
Thank you. No. Right. The school readiness program is essentially a program, it's a Great R and Great R partnership program implemented by Molteno and 2 other partners and sponsored by the Roger Federer Foundation in Limpopo, Free State, and Mpumalanga provinces. The focus of the program is on Grade R teachers primarily as they prepare learners to enter Grade 1 in the subsequent years. We empower ECD learning sites to be ready for learners. In other words, we use the primary school Grade R sites as the point of intervention, but also look for the private ECD sectors that are struggling around in the school surroundings so that they can learn together with the focused Grade R teachers in the school. We identify parents and the broader community around the schools to come and support the school, particularly in making the school ready for learners. So this is our model of intervention. The circle below is our primary focus, which is a Grade R primary school. And then we have got the ECD center in the surrounding that we will call that ECD center 1 and then the ECD center 2, which are offering Grade R. Thank you. So at the center of the intervention is the learner and is surrounded by the adults. First in line is the teacher, what we call the practitioners. The school management teams play a prominent role in making the school ready and also helping to incorporate the Grade R system, subsystem into the primary school. Now, as I mentioned, we have got the parents who command specific traits and skills that they must make them available to their learners. As you would have seen on the video clip there, all those outside activities are prepared by the parents, not just the SGB, but the parents. Now, the professional and learning committees, this is the grade R center where the teachers, the grade R practitioners are interacting with the ECD grade RR on daily and on weekly basis to share specific aspects of ECD learning. For instance, we have developed the benchmarks which all the learners or majority of learners must attain at different levels in a year before we can say they're school ready at the end of the year. Thank you. Now, here are the golden threads of the model. Children learn through play. We build a team of adults around the child, and the children learn to become competent human beings. They form cooperative relationships, and great teachers are constantly engaged during the PLC's meetings. Thank you. Following is the realm of activities. We train grade R teachers on curriculum and assessment. The mode of training primarily is face-to-face, but then we also have a supplementary tablet which carries all the modules that carry all the different development domains of a child, which the grade R teacher should take the learners through. But even of more significance is the concept of assessment in this grade R intervention. We are helping the grade R practitioners to shy away from formal assessment as we know it in the formal schooling system, but assessing learners by observing them and recording into their what we call kiosk, which is basically a tablet which has got the different elements of what must be assessed, the physical, the psychological, all those domains that we know, and they record back into the iPad, which we call a kiosk, and we are able from remotely to see what is happening in school A around assessment, what are the number of learners who are able to attain specific benchmarks, first term, second term, third term, and what is the percentage of learners whom we can call school ready at the end of the year. And we coach grade R teachers on site and remotely through the use of tablets. With the advent of COVID-19, especially from April last year, we had some 4 or 5 months of just intensive digital working through the tablet between ourselves and the grade R teachers. And I will share with you later on what the challenges we experienced. The collaboration between the grade R and grade RR within a professional learning committee is very central, and we found it quite useful because as we continue to record milestones in this grade R intervention, we realize that the grade RR also are lagging behind. So it's better to just kill 2 birds with 1 stone if we can. So we supply pre-literacy and literacy materials to learners, and it's quite interesting to see how the majority of learners are able to sound some of the words and to master some of the pre-literacy activities even before they progress to grade 1 in the subsequent year. The development of natural playgrounds by parents and members of local community, that is almost the flagship of this intervention, and parents are taking pride in making a significant contribution to the education of their children. here are the modules. I'm not gonna read all of them, except to say they have been structured in such a way that they target the different development domains of the children: psychosocial, physical, motor skills, and so on, and so good behavior, and so on and so on. So all these are what we are observing the learners on as we progress through the years. Thank you. So here we're just showing you the tangible results. This would be indoors activities, the actual learning, as we try to make the learners intellectually ready for school in the following year. Right, next, please. Sorry. Yeah, that's a continuation of those. Those are the classroom layouts for the children. So the outdoor classroom, these are the natural playgrounds. They comprise space for running, climbing, hanging, and swinging. That is jungle gym, as we know them from the urban areas. Water play areas, sand areas to strengthen their muscle motor skills, an area for pretend play, and resting areas, and so on. This is a continuation of what the good parents of Limpopo, Free State, and Mpumalanga continue to do. And they just take pride in visiting them or inviting visitors to come and see them. So I want to speak a little bit about the challenges here. School readiness and early learning require face-to-face interaction with practitioners and learners. This is conventional wisdom. Nothing can replace that face-to-face touch. And what this COVID did was to really create that distance between practitioners and the learners. And it has been very difficult. It was not difficult between us and the practitioners, us meaning the NGO trainers, coaches, and so on. But as you know, we don't expect the grade R learners to have cell phones and so on. So we have had to reach them via the practitioners, but also physically via their parents. And their parents also did not command a lot of sophisticated cell phones. They would have, traditional cell phones, but they also need, your SMS, money for, just so that they're able to respond to the teachers. That has been a big problem. So remote interaction has limited impact due to practitioners' limited exposure to ICT operations. So you have to, before you can actually go deep into the actual manipulation of the content, you have to still start with the preliminary skills, computer skills. Expensive data, particularly for parents, has been an inhibiting factor. The unavailability of smartphones and poor network coverage impacted negatively on the project. So lastly, lack of parental involvement due to lack of data and smartphones. So it became easier for parents to just present themselves rather than to communicate remotely. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Masenya. It's good to see another non-profit organization that's been around so long and that is continuing strongly. We're going to move on to another ECD program, and this contrasts with Mr. Masenya's project that focuses on the formal schools and ECD centers, where we're going to be looking at a home-based, non-center-based approach. We will hear from Ms. Flora Mans from the Pixikasere district of the Northern Cape. And it actually gives us an example of the challenges that Mr. Masenya has made. Ms. Mans was going to present live, but the connectivity in that area is very weak. So we have a pre-recorded video from her, and she is live on this webinar and will be able to take questions at the end of the program. So if we can ask for the video for Ms. Flora Mans to be played, please. Dani?
The video begin.
Good day, everyone. This is Flora Mans from the R broadcasting for you live on how we've managed to reach many people during COVID-19 on the Run Home to Read program. The Run Home to Read program is a program designed to assist of disadvantaged backgrounds, to assist them with reading, as well as to adopt a reading culture within families. So we've made use of 3 technologies, the digital technology systems, to get people to the program despite of COVID-19. We've made use of the WhatsApp program, where we get parents or caregivers connecting group with USB stick, and then we take the stick to the parent or the caregiver, and they would play the audio through a music box or any digital device at their disposal. And the last one was we got other parents or caregivers to read stories and then share the audio videos to parents.
Dani, we seem to have lost the sound. Dani, is there a bandwidth problem with the video? Dani, we're still not getting any sound coming through.
Assist us to get children to listen more attentively, to pay more attention to detail. And today, we just want to cross a live to you over to one side, where a group with a caregiver and a reading champion is busy with an activity that I just mentioned now. We're going live over to Rochelle, where she's busy with a program.
Dis ons dag aan, sê Francisco. En ons maak nie arbeid ontvlug van jou arbeid aan die kant van jouself. Jy krijg nie jou daarvan. Ek wil nie julle konfyt hê nie. Niemand se konfyt hê nie. Ga nou weg. Ek wil julle nie weer vandag sien nie.
Die onschuldige misdaad weer bestaan. Kan jy kan? Gaan jy? Nee, seun. Moet nie gestaan en dink. Wees gehoorsaam. Ek sê maar weer van. Die kan nog weer besluit te sê, kom, ek het nog weer daarop aan te smelt. Ek sal maar gaan, ek smeek asseblief.
So there you have it. But despite all this, we still had some challenges because it wasn't every parent or caregiver who had a cell phone. It was not every caregiver who had access to a audio or visual device that could take a USB stick. So many of the caregivers and children we've lost along the way. But to those who made an impact, we just want to say it was great impact. Because today, we can say that we've reached more families and more children than we've expected to reach during COVID-19 period. I thank you.
Thank you very much. It's nice to see links with the comment made by Puku that family remains central and storytelling in the indigenous language remains important. We're now going to move on to the schooling sector. For that, we will invite Ms. Kulula Manona, Chief Director of Foundations for Learning, Department of Basic Education, to tell us about what's been happening in terms of literacy and the theme that we're discussing today in the schooling sector. Over to you, Ms. Manona.
Thank you, Mr. Leroux, and good morning to Minister, to Prof. Rensbeck, to the chair of the session, and good morning as well to all the delegates who have joined this webinar. Apologies there. Thank you, Mr. Leroux. I just realized that I did not unmute myself. Good morning to the Minister, good morning to Prof. Rensbeck, to the chair of the session, and to all the delegates who have joined this webinar. And when it comes to the schooling, indeed, I'm going to talk about how we leverage technology as part of the literacy and reading development recovery agenda. There has been huge losses both to schooling as well as losses to learning itself that have been suffered by our children. But it is also important to always remind ourselves that the ability to read well is probably the most crucial skill that has to be taught, and that a positive attitude to reading is one of the most important values. And I want to appreciate what my colleagues have just done in the ECD space, where we can see where those positive attitudes are actually being cultivated, as in that space it's where the foundations are being laid. Moving on then, let's talk about what our vision for literacy is. Minister was very articulate in her keynote address in talking about this vision, which is a vision that all our children should be able to read for meaning by age 10. But we understand that we live in a connected world, and therefore this vision aligns very well with the vision of Africa. It also aligns very well with the vision of the world. And we know that these visions are actually articulated for the world in the Sustainable Development Goals, and in Africa, clearly articulated in the African Agenda, as well as in the Continental Education Strategy for Africa. Here home, well articulated as well in the National Development Plan. And so we have also picked them up and prioritized them as our very important imperatives. And this was done in the SONA, which is the State of the Nation Address of 2019. And literacy is also highlighted as one of the 5 fundamental goals in the medium-term strategic framework of government. If we move on then to the next slide, let's really talk about these learning losses. In ECD, we received a report from the World Bank, which showed that about 40% of children in low middle income countries had no access to ECD or to stimulating environments, particularly during the pandemic. And this is actually very worrying, particularly when we know the importance of the first 5 years for brain development in the life of a child. When it comes to schooling, we have the report from the South African Labour and Development Unit, which has also quantified and counted these losses. For instance, in grade 2, the average learner there in those that were sampled, when compared to their peers or to their peers in 2020, was found that actually only about 40% of the days of the previous school years were they able to attend school. When it comes to actual losses in learning, these very grade 2 learners were found that when compared to their learners, there were about between 30 and 43% of gains that they actually lost. And then when it comes to the DBE, we've also done a lot of work in terms of looking at quantifying these losses. For instance, we've seen that our learners score less when it comes to oral reading fluency when we compare them to the learners in their previous years or to their peers in the previous years. What we've seen then is that during the pandemic, we had to rely very heavily on remote learning. And reliance on remote learning has taught us some serious lessons. One of those is the importance of ensuring that we expand access to resources, particularly digital tools and resources, which became a must when our learners had to find themselves schooling or accessing learning in environments other than schools. But we must acknowledge that for us to be able to do this as a department, we need to really work with the sector and we need to mobilize these resources to be made available for our learners. If we move on to the next slide. Now let's just look at briefly what are these technology-enabled reading and literacy initiatives that we have implemented as a department. Let's look firstly at CAPS, which really lays out the policy context for this to be done. CAPS guides on the integration of 21st century skills with digital literacies in cross-curricular terms, while it also recognizes that the language classroom offers strong alignment and great opportunities for the development of literacy in broader terms. What we have done then as a department is to develop a professional development framework for digital learning, which draws from this in articulating digital learning competencies that we should ensure that are developed, particularly in our teaching force. So the CAPS lays the foundation for technology to be leveraged very clearly. Now, talking about technology and schooling, it's important to bring our teachers along this journey. In so doing, we also need to be very conscious of the fact that when integrating technology into learning, the technology-enhanced opportunities that we create and provide for our children should be grounded in pedagogy. Going back again to what the minister said in her address, that we envisage having learners who are able to read, to write, and to count for meaning by age 10. We then have to help our children with what they are struggling with. We have seen in the many tests, which are international and regional tests or assessments that our children participate in, that they struggle with comprehension, they struggle with problem solving, and they struggle with critical thinking, amongst others. With technology, however, and I think this is in the next slide, with technology, however, we are able to design activities which are going to ensure that our learners are able to engage with text and therefore stimulate deeper thinking, which will move them from being passive consumption to active producers of content. And that is also in the following slide. So talking about learning then in a technology-driven world, we see that technology can enhance learning and teaching. It can enhance other components of learning, which include assessments, and actually listening on 702 this morning, they were discussing the invention of what is called the Invigilator app, which shows just how much education has actually risen to this challenge and embraced the technology. So technology is integrated into learning. We see it integrated now into assessments. There are very intelligent assessment apps, and this one is the Invigilator app is an app that is actually used by both schools and also by higher education institutions to protect the integrity of assessments. We've seen the emergence of gaming as something very powerful. Here in the department, we have the coding and robotics that we have written a whole curriculum around, and which we are going to be implementing in our schools. So the power of technology has really is something that cannot be underestimated. Now, talking to this slide about the technology enhanced learning opportunities, I really again want to underscore the importance of pedagogy and ensuring that our children, when we provide to them learning opportunities which are grounded in technology, that is supported by pedagogy. And I've just explained the fact that with technology, we can be able to do this, and we can be able to design opportunities for them that will ensure that they really get to increase their engagement with text and that they can get to be deeper thinking individuals or learners that we want to see them be. If we move on to the next slide, still talking about teachers. If we look at this image that we have here, currently we have, or let me say rather, pre-pandemic, we had in the space of professional development be relying on seeing our teachers and running workshops and rolling those workshops out face to face, making those kinds of arrangements. But now the pandemic came and we had to think very differently about how to still reach our teachers and still provide them with the professional development opportunities that they still need, or that they needed even more with the advent of the pandemic. With technology, we have been able to curate for them content which is packaged in the form of micro-learning content. And this actually means that they are able to access professional development content wherever they are, and they are able to take themselves through their own professional journey. And it does what the essence of professional development is about, because it's about an individual being in charge of their own professional journey, with access, therefore, to digital tools and resources, and access to content that promotes their own agency and their ability to really take care of their own professional development. We've been able to do this. It's a flexible form of access to professional development, which is driven by the individual himself or herself. And I just will talk briefly in the next slide about what the micro-learning content is and what it is not. When you adapt micro-learning content, you are not just chunking already existing content or newly developed content into smaller bits. Rather, what you are doing, you are providing media-rich content which is complemented by social learning. It is an opportunity where active learning takes place and where the content creation provides opportunities for reflection, and it also appreciates context because it is small, it can be developed through the department, but we are also encouraging our teachers to be able to take their own content, develop it, and also publish it as micro-learning content, which then brings in the issue of agency as well as appreciation of context. In the next slide, this is an example of what the micro-learning content looks like in the app that has been developed. You can see then that On the left, small text, I apologize. You have content that talks to technical reading skills, phonemic awareness, and vocabulary, phonics. And I'm telling you, if I had an opportunity like this when I was teaching, perhaps I would have really been in a better space than I was in during my teaching days. And this is one of the courses that we have developed, and it's called Understanding How Children Learn to Read. Moving on, and I really just wanted us to talk about the importance of teachers in this space so that we understand that they have to be supported to be able to lead those learning journeys for those children. Now let's look at technology and what it can do in the creation of access to resources. We have to understand that with the pandemic that we're dealing with, every possible pathway of making reading resources available to learners should be explored. We have collaborated with partners like NGOs in expanding access to readers, but we have used technology to complement what we already have in print. We have availed books through digital platforms and made sure that information about where those platforms are and how to access them was widely publicized. We have worked closely with the sector. Now I'm talking about the business sector, particularly the providers of network here and data, to increase the suite of zero-rated sites which provide educational content, especially readers. We have increased or seen an increase in digital libraries. Here at the TBE, we have implemented digital libraries in our schools, in our provinces. Also, provinces themselves and partners have really seen that there is an opportunity to still make reading resources available, even though children were unable to go to libraries, by implementing digital libraries. With our partners, we have developed storybooks and readers in home languages, and we have shared these digitally. We've shared audio reading books with parents through social media, using applications like WhatsApp, like Facebook and Twitter. We've also seen reading materials loaded on USBs and shared with our provinces. So what we've also done is that we have seen that we can use digital opportunities to interact with books and to share the stories that we read. For instance, we have used the virtual space to promote reading clubs. The next slide then will then show us that, taking on the last point that I made in the previous slide, the reading circle. Prof. Rensbeck reminded us in his opening remarks of just how lucky we are as South Africans to have the kind of political leadership that we have in this country. In the spirit of Tumamina, the president called on all South Africans to get involved and to join the reading movement. With technology, we were able to respond to that call to action by establishing the President's Circle, a virtual reading club. This reading club is a reading club that allows an opportunity for all South Africans. We publish it widely to get involved, to talk about topical issues and social issues that emerge in the stories that get shared. It sits every last Thursday of the month at 4:30. And we really call on everyone in this webinar to join the Reading Circle by registering on www.nrc.org.za. The Minister spoke about the National Reading Coalition as a platform that has enabled us to work together as a sector. So this is just one example of what we have been able to do with technology by ensuring that that call to action is still responded to. The next slide then still looks at technology and what it is that we have done in the space of the Read to Lead campaign. We have used social media and other digital platforms to still promote the Read to Lead campaign. We curated content and publish it on social media. And for example, We have produced videos and published them using key individuals. The Minister also has a video where she promotes the importance of literacy and reading. We also have seen the production of audio clips. And so with social media, we are able to continue to amplify our voice through promoted posts across the social media spaces and with various messages that are curated for various target audiences. Moving on very briefly, I see that I just want to show in this slide how social media can give wings to messaging. We see that this is just 1 week's report of the social media interactions with the Read to Lead messaging here. In just 1 week, we had 54,645 impressions, and this refers to people who have viewed a social media post, whereas we had about 1,800 engagements. By engagements, we mean people who comment and share the post on their own social media platforms. Quickly moving on to the next slide. This is just an example of the posts, and if we move from this one to the next one, here we have also used the broadcast solution, and the benefit of the broadcast is that, for instance, for learners who are learning to read, it makes available stories and animation with narrator support. It is also a space where we see a lot of curriculum support, particularly for what we want to see happening, reading for meaning. There are stories, fiction and non-fiction, content that gets to be discussed, and broadcast. We also see that this broadcast solution is very key in terms of promoting a culture of reading by making available programs which are family focused and those that are school focused. So as a department, we have the DBE TV News, which is accessed on channel 122 on OpenView. We also have the YouTube channel. And with these solutions, we've been able to promote reading through programs that create an awareness around the importance of reading. And we know that these platforms provide a potential to reach every home as they are broad-based routes to large-scale distribution of reading resources and messaging. So as a department, we have different programs on the channel, which are aired on different days for different phases, particularly with a focus on the GET band curriculum and recovery programs. Moving quickly now. Here, just before I end, we saw in the videos that were shared with us here how important ECD is in the development of immersion literacy. It is where children do what they do best. They play, they get to be creative, they build things, they get frustrated, they learn, and they learn to navigate those emotions when they are frustrated, and they learn how to coexist with others. And so that's why we're saying ECD is where the foundation for the development of global competencies and the 21st century skills is actually they are laid there. And the importance of understanding that they exist with others. So to support this journey, which is something that I will quickly show as I will end in the next slide, to support this journey, we've integrated a technology in ECD programs, which are our key programs. For instance, we have the ECD Mobi app, which is a map for parents and caregivers. It provides them access to content and activities that they can do with their children. It is available on Google Play Store. We also have another technology-enabled ECD program, which is called the Play Online Training Platform. This one is a training platform which we make available for our practitioners. It is an in-service training and learning through Play platform for our practitioners, and it is based on the National Curriculum Framework, which we are implementing as a department. And we developed this one in collaboration with UNICEF. So I do want to say, as I'm ending, that I really thank all the partners, the development partners like UNICEF, as well as our strategic partners like the organizations that we work with, NCT, as well as the organizations that are under the banner of the NRC, who have really come to the party and ensured that together we make available resources during the pandemic and that we curate those resources. And again, I do want to thank the technology companies that have zero-rated all of these resources or platforms that our partners have made available to us. So thank you very much, Mr. Leroux, with that.
Thank you, Chief Director Manona. There have been a lot of comments and questions while you were making a presentation, and hopefully we'll be able to come back to you and deal with some of those. Let's move on to Ms. Maurice Kuman, who's Programs Technical Lead for Inclusive Education at Leonard Cheshire International. And she's going to speak about learners who are experiencing barriers to their learning.
Honourable Minister, Professor Rensburg, Mrs. Chubeka, thank you very much to the UNESCO National Commission for the invitation and opportunity to speak on this platform. It's been extremely informative so far and very inspiring what we've heard up to now. Today, I would like to apply a disability lens and an inclusive education lens to the whole discussion, and talk about the importance of technology as a game changer to provide equitable access to literacy and learning for all. I want to share with you some of the stark realities that we've become aware of globally in relation to children with disabilities during the COVID-19 pandemic. I think the reality is, and we've talked a lot in the session, and a lot of people in the chat have also referred to those living in rural areas. But I think when you talk about children with disabilities, the situation has always been dire for them. 50% of children globally, in especially low-income countries and middle-income countries, have never had access to school. Many drop out early. So it's as if the pandemic has always been there for children with disabilities. There's also been evidence during COVID of the huge socio-emotional harm that children have suffered during the pandemic, and that has been exponentially 10 times more true for children with disabilities and their families. COVID has not been a great equalizer. Those who say that live in a dream world, because people who are poor and live in remote areas, people with disabilities, are worse off because of COVID. The learning loss cannot actually be measured because children with disabilities are seldom assessed in systems, in global literacy measurement and assessments, and no provision is made to know what are children with disabilities doing in terms of literacy acquisition. The remote learning has not been effective. Where programs have been available, the infrastructure was not there, and accessibility features were not added to remote learning opportunities for both teachers and learners. And I think that terminology that is very much the order of the day in all the big UNESCO, UNICEF, World Bank initiatives of building back better, catch-up initiatives, continuity of learning, restoring of lost learning, largely bypasses people with disabilities because there is no provision made. The GEM report of last year that was published last year showed that only 40% of countries made provision for making remote learning available or make special provision for children who are vulnerable. But with the GEM report of 2020, it was also published a background paper on the magnificent potential of assistive technology to open up learning, especially in inclusive education. The potential of assistive technology is largely underutilized in our own country, in South Africa, and globally. And although it holds the huge potential to make it possible for every child to go to their local neighborhood school and have access to the same learning as other children if they have access to assistive technology, because this gives them multiple means of presenting learning, of representing presenting what they've learned, doing assessments, as Kulula Manona has said. The potential that's locked into assistive technology for people with disabilities is really absolutely magnificent. For them, it's not a luxury, but a total essential when it comes to having access to the curriculum, to enjoy and participate in the learning. I was looking at the wonderful Da'ar video and thinking how wonderful would it be if that whole class also included children with disabilities, children learning through sign language and so on. I think that what is coming out very clearly is it doesn't happen by itself. Special provision, special efforts have to be taken to make sure that there's a disability lens applied to every single recovery program intervention that we do, and just truly breathe the commitment that we've made 20 years ago as a country when we passed our first inclusive education policy. I want to share a little bit of my work in Kenya. This is taken in programs that we run on the borders of the Lake Victoria. And everything that people have been complaining about in the chat box this morning is so much more true for the rest of our continent, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, where large classes, lack of infrastructure, resources, is even more prevalent than in our own country. I think we sometimes forget how privileged we are in terms of systems, content, availability of materials and systems especially that we have in South Africa. This class is from Siaya. Incidentally, that is the small town where President Obama's grandmother stayed. And on the left you see a little case study that I'd like to share with you of a child reading with an Orbit reader in an ICT innovation project which we've introduced there. I think what has become very clear in the world where I work and from UNESCO, UNICEF and so on is the big emphasis placed on EdTech as an equalizer to provide access to everyone. The World Bank Inclusive Education Initiative has published a landscape review and actually emphasized how we can pivot towards inclusive education from the learning that we have gained during the pandemic. But what is needed are the 6 pillars or the 6 Ps to make assistive technology available on an equitable basis for all. The first thing is place, and I think many of the presentations today were emphasizing on content, but it was very clear that the space and the place where this is delivered really determines the way in which this will become accessible. Therefore, infrastructure, connectivity, and ecosystems are critical if you want everyone to have access to this content and these opportunities. The products are important. We need a large range of products. We need them to be available and affordable. Both this place and products can be made available, and I want to jump here to policy. If we have national systems, multi-sectoral policies, budgets, and large-scale systemic planning to make sure that we factor the procurement of assistive technology into all our budgets and all our rollout programs and provisioning programs. Because provisioning must be made as easy as possible, and that includes the selection, the choice, the procurement, also the management and the maintenance of assistive technology. And as Kulula said, it must be integrated into pedagogy. Teachers must be trained how to use this in their lesson planning to make learning accessible, to apply curriculum differentiation, universal design for learning, all the terms that are the building blocks of making learning accessible to all children, remembering that about 30% of every learner population would have some form of learning challenge. And then lastly, people. The people who use it, their real experiences, their needs. Kulula mentioned the access to the mobile devices to be able to access the wonderful tools developed by the DBE, and also not forgetting how we can bring in organizations of persons with disabilities to share from their own lived experience how what has been the meaning for them in having assistive technology at their disposal. But I'd like to not only point out the negative aspects of the introduction of assistive technology. I want to share some positive examples. In that very same Kenya program that I've told you about, we are including 3,000 children with disabilities in rural and remote schools. They are participating fully in their local neighborhood schools. We work to enhance the Kenyan national policy implementation, working closely with district officials who are equipped to support schools on an itinerant basis to understand the blended approach to learning, curriculum differentiation, universal design for learning, and to distribute e-content on the devices that we have rolled out. And we've started working with the government on ecosystems and backup support for the schools that use the devices. I want to show this little video to you of a little girl in a school in Siaya who has now been provided with an e-reader, a braille, refreshable braille reader. This is a Orbit, but there are many such devices which have been made available across Africa at an affordable level. You load her whole curriculum and all the reading books that she needs onto this small device, and then you can just see she has now been on the device for about a month, and look at how she is participating in learning. She is a blind learner. C, D, E, F, G. Okay, can you touch them now? You touch as you go. Read as you go. I think you get the picture, how beautiful the opportunities that this little girl will have now that she's acquired the skill, and with this little tool, which is the same price as the old clackety-clack Perkins braillers, she can go to any school and she can have her textbooks at her fingertips, and making learning accessible for her in her school closest to her home. I want to go on to the next slide. Sorry. I also want to share with you some success stories from our own country. I don't think, now that I'm working in Africa, previously I worked for the DBE, and I am filled with so much awe about the systems that are in place in South Africa and all the policies after 20 years of the national policy on inclusive education. There's been a recent study that was published on the progress made with the rollout of a screening, identification, assessment and policy and support policy of 2014, which showed that at least 65% of schools have functional school-based support teams. And these school-based support teams are those deliverers and coordinators of assistive technology at school level, and can make all the difference when it comes to ensuring that there's backup support for teachers in the classroom to use this. In 2017, South Africa published the guidelines on ICT, which came with a full range of specifications on assistive technology across all disability types. This was piloted and then translated into a national transversal tender together with other transversal tenders of the National Treasury to make the procurement so much easier and make it possible for schools, provinces to procure at large scale assistive technology and get it into schools. In South Africa, and I haven't typed it here, and I see Ms. Schroeder on the call, we are so proud to have South African Sign Language as a subject up to matric. Sign language should become available in every school in our country, and in every production that we do, any programs that we launch. South Africa has been at the forefront of developing mobile hearing and vision screening technology here at the University of Pretoria, and which is available to screen children on such a large scale, 10,000 children. It's being used in some provinces. That shows up how children can then be made referred to clinics to get hearing aids, to get glasses, so that there's no barrier for them to accessibility. There are ICT champions in schools, and there's an agreement that was made as part of their licensing agreement with the government that cell phone providers should provide assistive technology to selected schools free of charge. And then lastly, I need to just touch on the magnificent minimum qualifications policy for teachers and also the professional standards, as well as several online training programs and the fact that inclusive education modules have been introduced at all 24 universities where teachers are trained. Therefore, there is no excuse for teachers to say they have not been trained on inclusive education and cannot do it. I just want to give a bird's eye view of products before ending my presentation. Obviously, most of the devices that were talked about today, the radios, everything can have built-in accessibility features. This is growing by the day. Both iOS and Android are including accessibility features. Even my presentation here can be fitted with live captioning because PowerPoint on Microsoft is now made in such a way that you could add alt text and live captioning as you speak. There are such a lot of devices in terms of screen enlargement, learning support software for children with print disabilities. The only thing that I want to say that is very critical is that South Africa should ratify the Marrakesh Convention or treaty, which will make copyright free of charge for everyone with print disabilities. But I think the universal accessibility of our workbooks, the fact that our workbooks have been translated into Braille and that there are digital interactive workbooks available, I think that what people have said in the chat box I've seen is that if every official in every district and in every sub-district of this country would actually embrace inclusivity and make sure that they see that these opportunities reach the classroom, we can see growth in this sector overnight. I want to end off with this slide by making some recommendations on how we can ensure equitable resourcing post-COVID. I think that we must incentivize inclusive education and not focus too much on continuing segregated education. All that I've shown in this presentation shows how easy it is that if you have a large-scale commitment to deploying assistive technology in the mainstream, learning can be made accessible. Children are voting with their feet. They want to go to the school where their peers are learning. Technology must support teachers, not replace them. To build back better, we must think inclusively. It is not about tinkering on the sides from a special needs perspective, but looking at how do we change our methodologies, our teaching, our materials to make sure that they're all accessible and inclusive. When we budget, we've got to budget and track for data on how many teachers have been trained, how many children have been screened, how many children have had access to devices and technology, and what support programs are available for teachers. And lastly, we should support parents and other stakeholders because, as everyone previous to my talk said, parents are the people who work with the children on a day-to-day basis, and they were at the coalface during the whole COVID pandemic to keep their children learning. But let us not forget that the learning must be made accessible from a higher systemic level. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Kumar. That was very informative. And I particularly liked how your 6 pillars actually provide solutions not only for people who are experiencing barriers to their learning, but in fact can actually, I believe, supply solutions to across the board. I welcome Mr. David Diale, Chief Director for Community Education and Training in the Department of Higher Education Training, and he will give us a picture of youth and adult education within the department. Welcome, Mr. Diale.
Good morning to the Minister, the Chair of NADCO, the program director. Thank you very much for the opportunity. My presentation will focus on digital literacy initiatives in community education and training colleges. So as we move in the first slide is then focusing on the outline. I'm not going to go through that. We can move to the next slide. The key point to be made is that whatever digital literacy initiatives are undertaking, at the center of our response to them is the provisions in the Constitution of the country, the importance of the rights in our Bill of Rights, which inform the nature of programs that we then develop, as well as the provision for public colleges. So the right to life, the right to bodily integrity, the right to freedom of conscience. I'm not going to go through all of that. The point being made that as we talk to issues of human-centered development, the standard which we judge ourselves as to whether there's progress is actually contained in our Constitution. And that Constitution is therefore translated in terms of the next slide into the National Development Plan outcomes. With regards to the Department of Higher Education and Training, the outcome that the department is working on, of course, is around a skilled and capable workforce to support inclusive growth paths. This therefore means that all of the institutions in the post-school education and training system are then directly and indirectly implicated in the National Development Plan outcomes. And therefore, this has been translated into the mandate of the white paper in the next slide, which provides that we must find innovative ways to cater for the needs of youth and adults. It emphasizes the importance of finding various ways to respond to both educational and social or removing educational, financial, and social barriers. Critically, of course, is what modes of alternative delivery are we going to be providing, and therefore this is another key mandate from our white paper. This has then been translated in the next slide to the mandate of the legislation and policy, which must address, provide for ensuring redress in terms of access to basic adult education, as well as further education and training. So as we, as a country, in implementing the Harigura Mass Literacy Campaign, the Minister of Higher Education and Training therefore has to also put in place measures to continue to deal with issues of redress, issues of responsiveness, and in doing so, of course, issues of collaboration, issues of articulation, issues of partnerships. And of course, this is happening in the context of major discussions in the country around the fourth industrial revolution. And therefore, in the next slide, this is just a reflection on the positive as well as the perhaps negative impact of the processes of introducing the 4IR. The important point to be made here, without going into details, is that as a country, of course, we must be careful that as we focus on high-end skills, knowledge skills at a high-end level, in responding, of course, to the economy and responding to the labor market, that we also don't forget the importance of skills for those with less access to connectivity, less access to gadgets. Of course, we know that the impact of the 4IR its greatest impact is going to be for those that actually do not have access to these issues that we're talking about. And therefore, ensuring that we continue to fight the digital divide that is currently in place in terms of all of the points made there. Next slide. And therefore, within the PSET system, there's a plan in relation to 4IR, which indicates particular areas of implementation. And then these deal with curriculum, deal with resources, deal with the need to change courses, deal with issues around ensuring flexibility and modularity of courses. However, in doing so, the importance of us ensuring that those populations that are not being reached must be reached, and therefore issues around investment in connectivity and technology. As our fellow panelists have indicated, your rural areas are still major. There are still major challenges. Your townships, to some extent, in terms of connectivity and infrastructure, and therefore the importance of partnerships. Also, the importance of the system itself, ensuring that at various levels of the system, we do have the necessary capacity. And critically, our focus in terms of skilling, upskilling, and reskilling youth who are unemployed, adults who are unemployed. And I think Marie correctly has raised issues around how you access these different digital interventions is quite critical. And therefore the department, partly as a response to some of these digital literacy challenges, has therefore established the CET college system. In terms of the CET college system, what is critical there is that these colleges were established in 2015, partly as a response to the weaknesses of the old adult education and training system, but also the fact that the impact for youth and adults has not been felt in the country. So these colleges were then established, underpinned by the principles, one of ensuring that the social justice in the manner in which we implement programs, in the content of programs, in ensuring access to learning and teaching. Critical, of course, the importance of partnerships. Now, these colleges are meant to actually link dynamically with local communities so that colleges become a resource for communities, but also you draw on community resources. So those are the principles that then inform the work that the colleges are doing. The next slide is just a quick institutional landscape of the colleges, just to indicate that there are 9 colleges in the various provinces with 200 centers and 1,610 satellite learning centers. These are sites of delivery for a variety of programs that are in the next slide. So the programs in the community education and college deal with, firstly, your academic programs and qualifications. These are your qualifications, the General Education and Training Certificate for ABET, the Senior Certificate, and the new qualifications that will be coming on board, the National Senior Certificate for Adults. You then also have the colleges being mandated to provide qualifications and skills programs. So there's a huge drive in the implementation of skills programs. And then the third leg of the qualifications mix is also community-based programs. These would be programs that may be of short duration, that may not lead to be examined, but that are important for community interventions. So if communities have issues around the environment and where interventions are required, these colleges must also then play that role. So those are just the intentions in relation to how the colleges have been established. However, the impact of COVID in 2020 and continuing this year for these colleges, as reflected in the other panelists' presentations, also have revealed the weaknesses of the community college system. So this next slide deals with then the impact, just as an illustration of the impact and how the colleges have dealt with some of these challenges. Of course, the first one is around the impact on students and lecturer health. Whilst in the colleges there was no major death and high levels of infection, however, there was some impact in relation to the health of students and lecturers. One of the key problems was, of course, that psychosocial support for students and lecturers was implemented at a later stage. The third aspect was, of course, that part of the challenge of COVID was that we had to reprioritize existing resources, whereas the pandemic sometimes did require additional resources for responding to it. There were issues of attendance, issues of access to school infrastructure, where we use schools. There was a major impact, of course, in terms of teaching and learning time, in terms of exams, as well as the performance in exams. The overall point there being that the CET colleges could not fully utilize alternative modes of learning and teaching. And therefore, as a response to these issues about the pandemic, but also generally as a response to how we then need to put in place alternative modes of learning. In the next slide, we then have put in place a strategy for open learning. And open learning refers basically to approaches to learning and teaching, but including alternative modes of learning, whether online, whether distance education. And in relation to this strategy, the strategy has 10 outcomes. For CET colleges, there are two critical areas. One is the development of open learning courses and programs, and then the establishment of the necessary technology infrastructure. And this is, of course, underpinned by the policy on community colleges. This is also had to be accelerated as a result of the pandemic itself. So the next slide looks at the key actions that have been undertaken thus far in relation to dealing with open learning. Some of the activities are slightly advanced than others. The activity around the establishment of an information portal, this is an activity that's slightly behind. Activity 2, which is around establishment of technology enhanced community learning centers, which is an activity that is being implemented. Similarly with activity 3 on translating curriculum programs for remote and online learning modalities, the training of lecturers, the establishment of student and community support systems for that, activities in relation to career advice, the provision of laptops, and of course the supporting framework in terms of governance and management support. So the next slide then deals with the key pilot projects that we've put in place, partly as part of the implementation of this open learning strategy, but also as a response to how we then deal with different ways of learning and teaching. So currently there's a pilot on the establishment of technology and community learning centers. The department has started with 54 community learning centers across the 9 colleges. And basically the key issue is to put in place ICT infrastructure, both for administration as well as for learning and teaching. And this particular intervention started in the 2020-2021 financial year. So it's a relatively recent intervention, but partly accelerated by the pandemic itself. So this is the first one that then there was an intervention by the department. The next one deals with another intervention in the Eastern Cape, which is an intervention around the use of technology as part of innovation. So we've started this one in the Eastern Cape in the Buffalo Community Learning Center. And basically this is an intervention with the Department of Science and Innovation. And this is the creation of a living lab. The living lab it's a virtual space for training and capacity building. Drawing on various stakeholders. Its key aspect is how do we use technology to ensure or innovate. So the first point is that there are programs that are provided to unemployed youth in the area, basically in basic computer, web publishing, animation, coding, videography, and social entrepreneurship. These skills are provided. The second aspect of it is to see how these skills can be utilized for ensuring that the students provide digital services for the community with a purpose of income generation. So for example, once the students have been trained, they would then do a community assessment in terms of, in the local businesses, do they need websites? Do they need networks in terms of, in this area, what shops, what services are being provided? Can there be a database of those services? Beginning to look at how then those services get advertised and also broadly communicated. So that's the essence of this particular pilot project. We've started with one. The intention is to actually upscale it to the rest of the colleges. The third element is, of course, just quickly the translation of curricula and programs for open learning. I'm not going to go through that, but the point is that's the other element of the. Then the third intervention is around student and community support, which is around how then do you support students within the colleges, but also students who face barriers to learning. So the next slide deals with the student and community support services model. Then the third aspect of the projects deal with the CET Online project, which is training basically for our lecturers, upgrading their qualifications, and also basic training in computer literacy. So the next slide then quickly is the student and community support services. I think move to the next slide just to indicate the model of community support, our community support services. I'm not going to go through it given our I see I have time limits, but basically this is around how we then support students from the entry into colleges when they're in the, in terms of inclusive support as well as exit level support. Next slide. Yeah, next slide. I think I've talked to these points. And then the last intervention by the department then is the provision of laptops, particularly for lecturers, firstly, and then, of course, I think later for students. Now, the last slide is then the key issues that we have faced as part of trying to implement these interventions. I think the first one around issues of management and leadership as people who must drive these digital skills, so the need to capacitate them. As other panelists have indicated, resourcing of access to digital skills, issues of connectivity, those continue to be key issues. The third issue, of course, is perhaps a caution around how we approach this issue of providing digital literacy and avoiding an approach that sees people as deficit as a result of them not having these ICT or not being able to utilize some of the ICT gadgets. Some of the issues colleagues have talked about around, the digital divide in terms of infrastructure, connectivity, and data. Chair, let me stop there rather than elaborate on some of the points. I see both my chairs are indicating that my time is up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chief Director Diale. We look forward to seeing how all of these get rolled out and linking with community rollout hours to reach people on that. Our final presenter is Mr. Gerrit Lotz, who is the Vice President for People and Organizational Effectiveness from Goldfields South Deep Mines, who will give a corporate perspective on the issues we've been discussing. Welcome, Mr. Lotz.
Thank you very much. Honourable Minister, Programme Director, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. Good afternoon. My name is Gerrit Lotz. I'm the Vice President for People and Organisational Effectiveness at Goldfields. It is a great honour for me to give a brief business perspective of how important literacy is in building the workforce for tomorrow. Whilst I don't have the mandate to do so, let me maybe just start off on behalf of the industry to congratulate everybody on this call for the sterling work your institutions are doing in promoting literacy across South Africa. I do not profess to be an expert or a subject knowledge expert on literacy. However, the one thing we do have in common, and that is that literacy is a challenge that impacts every sector in South Africa, and it certainly holds the key for us to unlock the future value for our country. Minister, when we have such big challenges in our country around literacy, it almost seems a little bit premature to talk about the development of advanced skills. But I do think it's important that we start with the end in mind, and that end must be the dignity and meaningful jobs for all. If we go to the next slide, just in terms of content, maybe just an overview of how the world of work is changing and the impact that is having on the workforce of the future. Some of the shifts we require to win, a brief overview around what Goldfields and South Deep is doing around literacy, and maybe leaving a few thoughts around the national plan of action going forward. So if we look at the next slide, we know that the future of work is being reshaped. The occupational mix of the economy is changing and the demand for skills is changing with it. Where industry in the past were able to accommodate the less literate, this is changing at an alarming and unstoppable rate. To uplift the socioeconomic plight of our citizen, literacy is critically important, but the reality is that we may have to go beyond this. Employers will need to manage large-scale workforce transitions that could involve redefining workforce needs, retaining people, and moving them into new roles. This presents significant challenges, but it's also an opportunity to upgrade jobs and make them more rewarding. The choices that we as employers face could create a ripple effect in the communities and societies, where we're seeing that automation will be replacing some work. We're seeing that the workplaces are changing, requiring very different skill sets, with some transactional skills becoming less and less needed or even obsolete. You're going to have to embark on quite strong programs around skills redeployment and upskilling people to respond to these changing needs. We're seeing new jobs are emerging. We're also seeing that the employee characteristics are changing. Not only is digital and technical skills important, but also the social skills are becoming more and more important as people have to interact in more network organizations and institutions. If we look at the next slide, on the left-hand side, it sort of spells out a lot of the challenges that we face in South Africa around literacy, the educational inequalities, and how that impacts people and the economy. I do think, however, it's important that we also reflect on the upside of digitalisation. A recent study by the McKinsey Global Institute analysed the performance of 71 developing countries over the last 50 years, and they've identified 18 countries that outperform those through rapid GDP growth over decades. And by leveraging technologies, these countries have fostered productive companies and highly competitive industries. The study further interviewed 70 South African executives who were confident that technology would unlock greater productivity against many sectors of our economy, sectors that has previously been regarded as becoming dysfunctional. Such productivity gains have the potential to drive substantial improvements in individual businesses and the entire economy. McKinsey estimate that technology-related gains could triple South Africa's productivity growth, more than double growth per capita income, and add more than a percentage point to South Africa's real GDP growth in the next decade. Digitization also could trigger quite a breakthrough in women's empowerment. It is opening and fast-tracking access for women to roles that have traditionally been perceived as falling in the domain of men. Skill gaps are very difficult to close for adults. It's not impossible, but very difficult. And basic education will have to become a core focus as a foundation on which we build more advanced skills moving forward. Previous speakers, next slide. Thank you. Previous speakers have spoken a lot around the importance of STEM jobs. We're seeing that various studies have predicted that STEM jobs will grow twice as fast as non-STEM jobs. And we're seeing many organizations, especially in the mining industry, but broader than that, are developing programs to address the skills gaps in the community and ensuring that the industry has the skills needed to address the immediate future. Now, instilling foundational skills through traditional educational systems and developing programs has in the past been the cornerstone of workforce readiness. However, we see that with the fourth industrial revolution, job opportunities requires more technical skills and perhaps even more targeted education. And to understand the future industry-specific demands requires much better collaboration between all stakeholders and the involvement from business. Such input can assist greatly in driving an industry-driven learning, and talent need projections to redefine the education required to ensure a suitably skilled employment pipeline for the opportunities that may present themselves going forward. If we look at the next slide, this is just a reflection on the journey that we have undertaken at South Deep. I think we have realized that if we do not invest in basic education, if we do not do our part in involving our community and preparing them for the future, the organization will be the worse off and we will not be able to meet our future requirements. The table on the right gives you an overview of the type of basic education interventions that we have launched over the last 3 and a bit years in trying to create a pool of suitably skilled workers in our host community. We have in this process used technology to assist us greatly. And at the end of my talk, we will share a short video just to demonstrate some of the initiatives that we've embarked upon to try and strengthen some of the basic education and skill sets required for the mine going forward. I would like to conclude just by the last slide is sort of looking at a number of barriers to addressing the widening gaps in skills needed to fulfill the requirements for economic growth. I think the first one that we have to address is we have to embrace digitization. It is absolutely critical, but not digitization in the broad sense. I think one has to go and prioritize digitization in industries that is going to give South Africa a competitive advantage and to ensure that our priorities are technology driven and develop the capabilities required to position us to be competitive in future. I think the second point is that we have to ensure that our workforce is future ready. And there we see the emergence of immersive training technology like virtual and augmented reality, which are great tools to accelerate development and the assessment of competence. We have been using this very successfully on our mine, especially where you have employees that do not want to embark upon basic adult education. We use virtual technology as a great means to give them the skills needed to be effective in their roles. I think the third point we have to look at is that the investment in strategic investment in human capital is becoming critically important. We have to focus there on the improvement in teaching quality, literacy, and STEM subject. And we have to look at how do we promote stronger technical and vocational education and training for the future. And last but certainly, perhaps most importantly, is that we have to look at how we can adopt a collaborative approach, not only in dealing with the literacy challenge that we have in our country, but also in developing the skills needed to make us competitive going forward. And in this regard, partnerships between government, educational institution, and business is going to be absolutely critical, especially in shaping the workforce of the future. And at the moment, I think we all have got a common goal, common objectives, right, and common approaches. But still, we drive this sort of very much as separate entities. And something that I think we have to look at in the field of collaboration is how do we develop collaborative skills hub that makes really lasting and meaningful impact, that we can get economies of scale and really start looking at dealing with literacy, foundational skills and more advanced skills that is going to give us or fill the skills gaps that we have going forward. So I think that was just a very short and brief overview. I think we would like to conclude with a short video just reflecting what we are doing in terms of using technology for the advancement of literacy amongst communities.
Project Literacy has been working with Goldfields South Deep Mines in offering adult education and training, recognition of prior learning, and the foundational learning competencies. Tsolofelo Childcare, one of the educators, is going to tell us about the blended learning program.
Blended learning has been an interesting experience. Since 2012 to date, I have received a good feedback from my learners as well. On my side, it has helped me in monitoring learners and also in passing on skills and knowledge in a way that it helps me to track my learners' areas of weaknesses and strength. And also in the administration side, I'm able to rely on it, whereby it also tracks and gives me feedback on what learners have done according to unit standards and also according to the weaknesses and strengths, so that it makes it easier for me to know when and how to intervene. I'm able to group my learners according to the feedback that I was given. So it means with the culture of ABET, whereby they say learner-centered, I'm able to address every learner's area of needs, and then I'm able also to help in motivating the learners to do better in their areas of strength. And also, it has helped getting a good result as compared to norms of using face-to-face. Also, it doesn't break this culture of using face-to-face, because I'm able to use feedback as to how to apply and when to apply face-to-face in my class. So actually it has worked wonders, and then I have got a good feedback and improvement in different learners, like the learners with barrier, learners who with special needs, to prove that it is a best tool to work with the facilitator. So to me, I can say it's a facilitator assistant, and it's very much convenient and relevant.
Musa Mkwanazi, also an educator, will tell us about what they did to cope with the lockdown situation.
We created a WhatsApp group with our learners so that we can communicate with them during lockdown, can learn with them. Our learners responded positively and our learners were happy. And then the only challenge that we've managed to face with our learners is just that some of our learners didn't have a smartphone. And I'm talking about something like 20 to 25% of our learners who didn't have a smartphone in our center. Then we didn't want to accommodate those who have a smartphones. We did have to accommodate everyone, including those who don't have a smartphones. Then we sat down with our team and we planned that we need to create internal assessments. Those assessments were to be delivered to our communities, local community shops, where learners will go there and sign the register and take their assessments, then bring back the following day. And we will go there and take those assessments and mark those assessments. After we have marked those assessments, we have to give individual report for every learner. And our learners were happy, even though it was painful because of lockdown measures. We did this because we care about the learners, and our learners were very very, very, very scared that the center might be closed forever. The challenge that we had with our learners moving forward, it was the data, because our learners will complain. Some other learners, we will ask them privately. Sometimes we will call our learners to say, we are not participating anymore in the group WhatsApp. They will tell us, say, we don't have data. It was a difficult one for us to help them, because I'm talking about more than 100 learners. And that data issue, that was the one that made us to create internal assessments. Those were delivered to our communities.
Thank you, Mr. Lotz, and thank you to all the presenters. We've ran slightly over time, and I'm going to ask Mrs. Jobeka if she'll allow us 5 minutes. There were a few questions aimed specifically at the schooling sector, which might enjoy some response from Mrs. Manona, if she's still available. So if I can maybe just summarize them, is that okay, Mrs. Jobeka?
I think it's fine. You can do more than
Okay.
You can take more than 5 minutes. Let's take the questions.
Okay, so I've tried to club them, as I say, quite a few related to the schooling sector, and came from, amongst others, and French. And these are questions around trimming of the curriculum to focus on literacy and numeracy. A question around what are the government's action plan to assist schools with literacy and improve technology in rural schools. And linked to that, the whole issue of action and implementation and the actual availability and connectivity specifically in rural areas. Ms. Manona, I don't know if you can respond to that. Or any one of the other presenters?
I can see Ms. Manona is still on the platform. She's on mute though. Let's check if she can.
Thank you so much. Apologies, I was trying to switch between the two devices there to unmute on this one. Yes, I've noted the question on the trimming of the curriculum. Let me start with that one. And to confirm that with our trimmed annual teaching plans, which we have mediated to all provinces, reading and numeracy is given the center stage. So those trimmed curriculums do not compromise on the key skills that our learners should be taken through in terms of what our teachers are going to do. Yes, understanding that there is a competition with regards to time and what it is that our teachers can realistically do given what is left of this year, and also given what it is that our learners are bringing perhaps as deficits from the previous year. So that is why we have focused on ensuring that we really ground the important fundamental skills of that particular year in the trimmed curriculums. The second one, Mr. Leroux, what was the second one?
Okay, so that's just one. And then the actual action plan, I think to describe an action plan in a form like this in the time given is a bit difficult. But there were questions around what is the government's action plan to assist schools with literacy and the improvement of technology in rural schools.
Oh, that we have developed as a department, and this was actually done in collaboration with a number of organizations as well as reading experts in the sector, the Integrated Reading Sector Plan. The Integrated Reading Sector Plan is premised on a number of strands, and those strands include ensuring that our teachers are supported, so there is a very strong inclination on professional development, and that is actually looking at professional development activities for our teachers, particularly in the area of reading and in the area of numeracy. It is also premised on learner support, and learner support also, including that of teachers, involves or includes the provision of devices. And we have been rolling out devices to our schools, and these schools also include rural schools. Actually, rural schools are prioritized, as well as schools special needs schools. And we have deployed ICT equipment, and we are doing this in partnership with the mobile technology companies and together with the Department of Communications. And we have an action plan that spans from 2019 and right up to 2022. And I think this is information that we can make available, Mr. Leroux, and even if it's post this, perhaps if there is a platform where we can make available all of this information that is required so that people can be able to interact with that information and can still pose further questions to us.
Thank you very much. Then there was also a question from Dakalo Mahaho about the training and development of the teacher assistance program and the implementation of the teacher assistant program. I don't know, again, Ms. Manona, if you are able to talk to that.
This is part of the I think there was a reference during the webinar to the employment initiative of government. And so as the department, we have been privileged to receive opportunities to place 300,000 youths in our schools as teacher assistants. We also created an opportunity specific to reading where we deployed about 23,000 reading champions. So with regards to the question that is asked, what we have done or what we have seen with the evidence that emerged, particularly from the reading champions, was that the culture of reading in our schools began to take on a different shape. The presence of the youths in our schools saw them reviving school libraries, ensuring that they also set up spaces where there are spaces in schools that had not been utilized, and it saw also the institutionalization of the important focus period on reading, which is the drop all and read, as just one of the means that their presence was to ensure that the culture just changes, and they became that interface between the teacher and the school. We also were reliant on technology, particularly because they are placement coincided with lockdown periods in the country, and we had to use technology to be able to access them, to provide training to them, and just to be able to guide them when they were in our schools. And we've done this in collaboration with 10 organizations which form part of the National Reading Coalition, with the assistance of the NCT, to ensure that we reach out to them and give them that support. We also, as part of the package of support that we provided with them, we provided them with work plans. And I do also want to make this important information known of one of the other partnerships that we've had with Teacher Connect, which is a WhatsApp platform that allows communication and sharing of resources. So we loaded their data onto Teacher Connect, and we're able to distribute all the information that they required. And we were also able to track that when they were in schools, they were able to access information. And really, we also have received very positive reports from the teachers who were mentoring them and the school principals. Fortunately, now I do want to share with you, because this now has been made public, that that opportunity is going to open up again, or is opening up again. So we are busy finalizing our plans and an issue relating to numbers, how many we are going to be placing again in our schools. And these really afford us the opportunity to see that reading movement that we have called for, supported also by that call by our president, coming into action when we have young people that interact with the schools and the communities and become that glue and that interface that bring these two together. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Manona. And then there were a couple of comments which maybe you don't have to respond to now, but there was a comment to suggest that the policy on use of cell phones in schools needs to be re-looked at, because a lot of principals still have negative attitudes to children having cell phones and using cell phones. And then also that a budget for digital devices, as is done with textbooks by the government, should also be looked at and implemented. There was one question for the adult sector, and I don't know if Mr. Diale can answer this, but Ingrid de Jager was inquiring about programs for young adults with intellectual challenges who were not given opportunities to become literate. I don't know if Mr. Diale wants to respond quickly to that, or if we note the question.
Chair, thank you very much for the question. I've indicated in my presentation that we have a policy that then deals with issues of student support. An aspect of that is the issues related to how we respond to students who are facing barriers to learning. However, one can actually provide a more elaborate answer beyond the webinar. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Diale. And finally, I'd like to note a comment made by Terence Ball from the National Lexicography Unit about their role in making dictionaries available to public schools in all languages. And perhaps that discussion can also be taken outside of the webinar by contacting the organizers of the webinar. So I'd like to then conclude and say thank you very much to all the presenters. I think there were some valuable aspects learned there, and I will now hand over back to Mrs. Chubeka to make the closing remarks. Thank you very much. Mrs. T, you're still muted.
Hi, just to say thank you to everybody. Thank you very much for everybody who's been part of this. As I said, it's our first event as the UNESCO Education Sector Committee, which I chair. Our inaugural meeting was on the 8th of July, which was only 2 months back. And so to have a webinar with all the quality presentations was just very exciting for us. We know that there were a lot of people who tuned in through the DBE Facebook, some were on YouTube and on other social media platforms. And we thank all of those people who took the time. I want to also just add my voice before I say more, my voice in congratulating the Puku team on their award. You know, the presentation that you made here today showed us that this was not a fluke. You've earned this, you worked hard for it. We are so proud to call you our own, really and truly. It was just, you know, you sit there. Sometimes people get these accolades and you think, what is it that they've done? But with Puku, you can see it. Thank you so much. You did not only share what you do, you challenged us, each and every one of us in our little corners, to look at what we're doing through different eyes. We were challenged, we were excited, but also we learned. Oh boy, did we learn. If you look at our program, the objectives for the webinar were to share knowledge and experiences regarding inclusive and good technology enhanced literacy programs for both youth and adults, explore creative ways to make literacy policies and programs better and more inclusive, identify key issues and generate new ideas for a reimagined technology enhanced teaching and learning for enhanced teaching and learning in COVID-19 times and beyond, as well as, which is quite important, propose concrete ways in which government and partners can collaborate to promote technology-enabled literacy programs. I believe we've gone some way in doing this, and I'm hopeful that we'll continue the conversations. Thank you very much to those people who went out of their way to say, we believe this should be done. And of course, the opportunity is still there for you to send your comments and your questions and your proposals, just as you've been doing on the chat line. And I'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end. Minister Motshekga and Professor Rensbeck spoke very eloquently on the importance of literacy, which Minister Motshekga, when she spoke of reading, said it's not just an element of education, it is education itself, the core. However, both of them acknowledge that reading levels in our country are not where they should be. Now, if you add digital technologies to that, you then realize we still have a long way to go. We've got a lot to do and to do better. The presentations today, however, demonstrate just how much is being done on the ground. There is just so much in various spaces. Also illustrated through the presentations was the digital divide. You know, that will only increase if we do not pull things together. And that is what I loved about some of the challenges that you put to us, because unless we do something about it deliberately and not leave it to chance and not leave it only to government, the digital divide may not narrow. I mean, I liked that just this webinar itself, not only through through what people were saying, but also if you looked at the challenges that Flora Mans had, you know, it shows that we really still have challenges, but also what with the will and with commitment, you can do something. It doesn't mean you sit and you say, well, we don't have this. I mean, Flora Mans from the Northern Cape showed this so clearly. Firstly, she couldn't connect, all right, she had problems with connectivity, but she showed that the various technologies that they're using in trying to promote literacy where they are. And I think, and those are some of the lessons that I'm talking about. They may not be uniform, they may not all happen to scale, but certainly there is so much that we can do. I want to go back again on personally what I learned. Puku, your repatriation and inter-translation in children's literature. I was writing down and I was thinking, you know, it is so good that, you know, I am retired, that even as I am retired, there is so much space for me to learn and learn new things. And I'm grateful for the opportunity that for chairing the Education Sector Committee of the National Commission for, you know, South African National Commission of UNESCO, because then I can continue to grow, but through this platform, also be able to share what we're getting from all of that we're hearing. And very useful and exciting proposals about celebrating children's literature. And we are going to learn from you and continue with the webinars. You are continuing with your webinars on children's literature. We are continuing with webinars. And again, I'll refer to this as I close. But there are lots of issues that were just so exciting and so important that came up that reverberated. They didn't come just from one presenter. The issue of community and family literacy, for instance, the strategies that we want to look at. Just ensuring that there's increased presence of digital technologies. And again, just to go back and say thank you so much for the very specific proposals that you've made to us. One that didn't feature here, but that came to me directly was, of course, from Maris Kuman, who's always been sensitive to. And she reminded me that there is something called, what is it, Marina? But that we must be able to accommodate people. And at this webinar, for instance.
Live captioning.
Come again?
live captioning and reasonable accommodation.
Reasonable accommodation was the term that I was looking for. So we're going to do that, and in the next seminars, we hope to accommodate those. This time we had hoped to have a sign language interpreter. We didn't quite get it right, but we will continue to grow. And this is also a platform that we want to use for growth. I've already said for us as the committee, this was our first one, but COVID-19 has also taught us the importance of innovating and looking at new ways of working. If your experience during this period of COVID-19 is anything like mine, you will have experienced reduced service delivery. I've had painful experiences with two of the major banks in South Africa, and everybody cites COVID-19. We can't do this. No, unfortunately, we're not working. Talking months, of not getting service. God forbid that we do that to our children, particularly the children from rural areas whose services are already not the best. We are obligated to find new and creative ways to reach them and to deliver the quality that our children need and deserve. In the 4 years of our tenure as this new Education Sector Committee, we are hoping to host more dialogues and webinars that impact on education. I've asked members of the committee to propose topical and critical issues to put on the agenda for engagement in the coming months and the 4 years of our tenure. Thank you very much to everybody for making our first one a success. I am extending that same request to all of you to send us your proposals of things that we should be pushing in the South African public, whether it is for our children or our teachers, our parents, or the general public, things that we know that the country is interested in hearing that we want to put on the agenda. Please don't hesitate to send us those. We are still finalizing our program of action for the coming months and the coming years. You can send those through to Zinhle Zungu. I'm sure many of you have her contact details already, but she can put them on the chat line so that everybody has them. And as I close, and I hope I haven't forgotten anybody, but as I close, I truly want to thank the team that helped us put this together. I want to start, they know that she's my pet at the moment. She's my favorite person because she supported me so much when in fact she doesn't work for me full time. And that is Zinhle Zungu, who has taken so much time to support and lead and coordinate. I've been sending her messages after midnight to ask her to go to bed because she doesn't sleep. She's been working on this. We gave her very little time. I want to thank the departments of basic education and higher education for all they've done to make sure that this success. Whose COO you saw chair this, he worked with us as part of the organizing team. And then the communication teams of both departments of higher education and basic education. Thank you for a sterling job. I was born before technology. All these things that you were telling me about, your all these social media platforms, I know very little about them. And of course, my struggle with the computer yesterday is legendary. But anyway, we got through today. And lastly, I want to thank the technical team. You heard us call out to Danny so many times. You heard us call out, well, you didn't, but some of us were communicating with Semi. There were lots of them, in the background. They put us through, despite some of the technical glitches that you saw, they dragged us kicking and screaming to come and try our videos out so that at least disruptions are minimized today. Thank you so much to everybody who was part of this today. Until next time, thank you all. The seminar is now, the webinar is officially closed.